Some of the things that I like to play in my solos are not just an arpeggio or just a scale run, but more a combination of things or a certain way of playing something that makes it more interesting. In this video, I'm going to show you 10 different patterns that I like to use for C7 chords. Most of them are longer runs for just a single chord, but you can of course use them in many different ways. My name is Larsen, learn jazz, make music. Let's just start with some of the basic arpeggios, because there's a lot to be said for really being creative with the things that you already know, and you can always get more out of them. Then gradually it's going to get more and more complicated, and it's going to end up completely outside. This is coming out of a basic C7 arpeggio, like this one. But playing the pattern that I'm using here makes it sound much more interesting, because the pattern is creating groups of 3 notes which move around on top of the meter and make the whole thing sound a lot better. A lot of what I think you want to explore with material like this is finding a combination of what makes the notes, the arpeggio or scale or something else sound good, and then also make it practical and easy to play. Before I'm going to get into the less common structures, then the next logical candidate is the arpeggio from the third of the chord, the E half diminished, which becomes a great intervallic melody like this. This example is just a way of playing the basic arpeggio shape. Here I'm using legato technique to make the line easier to play by giving your right hand a bit more time to move, so the pull-off is giving you time to change to the next string. This pattern is something that you can apply to a lot of different arpeggios to get melodies that move around more instead of just running up and down arpeggios or scales in one direction all the time. Let's check out some less obvious examples that sound really solid. This example is using a group of 5 notes, and I'm playing it so that it repeats in octaves, something you will see quite often in this video, mainly just because that's really practical on the guitar. The 5 notes are G, A, B flat, D and E, which sort of spells out a G minor 6-9, or you could also consider it some type of G minor 6 pentatonic scale. Against the C, it's C7 9-13, so it's pretty spot on for the sound of the chord. The way I'm using it here, it's turned into a melody that is a group of 6 notes. Now, if you just play the main pattern, just the notes, then you actually get a 5-note grouping. And while 5-note groups might seem more hip, then the melody with the 6 notes is a bit more interesting because it changes direction and is also a lot easier to play. The next example is a more distinct or dissonant sound on top of the chord, but that also makes it a little bit more interesting and definitely worth checking out. This pattern is really just a way to emphasize a wrong note on the C7. The basic group of notes is a B flat major triad with an added sharp 11, which you could practice like this. So it's just the B flat major triad, and then I'm adding the E in between. And again, this is played across octaves. The note F is sort of a wrong note on the C7, and this pattern is really playing with that and trying to get that dissonance across. I often convert melodies to chords just to have an idea about how they actually sound in context. And in this case, that will give you this. So here we have the B flat major triad, so second inversion B flat major, and then the E on top. And what makes this interesting is probably the combination of the major 7 between F and E, and then also the B flat. And if I take those 3 notes and then put a C under them in the bass, because then we have sort of the sound on top of the C7, you get this voicing. And the melody that I'm using here is designed to really get that dissonance between the F and the E come out on top of the chord, because that's really the interesting effect that we want to get there. That's also why it's great to have it as a repeating pattern so that you can really hear how that works. Let's have a look at some triad options that sound incredible. Probably the only thing that's better than using a triad in a solo is using 2 triads, or rather a triad pair. Here I'm using G minor and A minor triads, and the way I'm improvising with them is pretty free. It's not really a strict pattern, but I'm using one triad at the time to create this feeling of shifting colors on top of the chord, which is something that I think is really great for triad pairs. If you want to improvise with triad pairs, then spend time learning triads in inversions, as diatonic triads in scales, in positions, and of course also along string sets. That's going to give you the options that you need, the freedom to move around and improvise with material like this. You can also check out this video on practicing triads if you want some more strategies and exercises. Now I think it's time to add some more interesting notes to the mix before I'm going to show you structures that are not really arpeggios like the ones that we usually use. This arpeggio is from the C Lydian dominant or G melodic minor scale, and it's not really a diatonic arpeggio. The diatonic arpeggios in G melodic minor would be G minor major 7, A minor 7, B flat major 7 sharp 5, C7, D7, E half diminished and F sharp half diminished. But you can still construct this chord. So if we have the scale here, then you can see how we can take F sharp, B flat, D and E to get our F sharp 7 sharp 5 arpeggio. And it sounds great on the C7 chord as a C7 9 sharp 11. Let's have a look at some chordal harmony, because they're great arpeggios instead of all the third based arpeggios that we've been using until now. You can see this as one large chordal arpeggio with 4 notes or 2 3-note chordal arpeggios. And you can also use them either way. I like playing them this way, mainly just because it changes up the melodic direction and makes it a little bit more interesting and surprising. You probably already know the sound of chordal voicings, like this. But you can also explore all of these as arpeggios, and they sound really great because they're so different from the regular stacked thirds that we are always using in the triads and the 7th chords. Let's check out some more exotic sounding triad pairs before we get into the completely outside stuff. Once you start to use the Lydian dominant sound on the C7, you can actually get some really interesting sounds by finding the right way to emphasize the sound of the scale. As you know, the Lydian flat 7 and the basic C7 scale are identical, except for the F sharp and the F. Using triad pairs can be a great way to create some beautiful sounding melodies that really get that sound across and really get that F sharp in there. Here I'm using the B flat augmented and the C major triads, which together actually form a completely perfect C7 9 sharp 11. I really love the sound of how these triads shift on top of the chord, and this is actually something you should check out for all the other melodic minor modes as well, because it works great both for alto dominance and tonic minor chords. Now let's have a look at how we can take it a little bit outside. This is close to the sound of the Lydian flat 7, but it's more dissonant and more out. I'm using triads a tritone apart from the diminished scale. So the diminished scale that goes with the C7 will be this scale. And in there we have 4 major triads. We have C, E flat, G flat and A. And I'm using a combination of the A and the E flat triad in this pattern. This pattern gives you a lot of tension on top of the C7, but it's actually not that far away, especially if you choose to resolve to an F chord like F major 7. The next example is pretty out there and atonal, so it should sound really outside and dissonant, but it's actually not that bad. The augmented scale is a weird sounding scale because it's symmetrical and atonal, but that's also why it can be such a nice effect on top of the chords. In this case, I'm using B flat augmented on top of the C7. And I'm using the 3 major triads in there, the B flat, the D and the F sharp. And if you think about it, the material in that scale should actually sound weird and outside, but it actually sounds pretty cool, and that's probably because we have these symmetrical melodies that are very strong. Besides dominance, you also often come across long stretches of minor 7 chords, And if you want to explore how you can get started making some beautiful outside melodies on those minor 7 chords, then check out this video that gives you a lot of different options, but also talks about how you create strong melodies using that material.